Susan was a woman who had spent her entire life putting others first. She worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, raised her kids with love and care, and always found time to help her neighbors. But despite her hard work, she often felt invisible in the eyes of the world. One sunny afternoon, she decided it was time to do something for herself, something small but meaningful. She wanted to buy a nice handbag, one that would make her feel special. With her savings tucked safely in her wallet, Susan walked into a luxury boutique located in the heart of New York City. The store gleamed with polished glass windows and expensive-looking displays. Gold accents adorned every corner, and mannequins wore outfits that looked like they belonged on magazine covers. As Susan stepped inside, she immediately felt out of place. Her simple jeans and sneakers stood in stark contrast to the sleek, designer-clad shoppers wandering around. The salespeople behind the counter barely glanced at her as she entered. They were too busy chatting among themselves or scrolling through their phones. Susan hesitated for a moment but reminded herself why she was there. She approached one of the associates, a tall, impeccably dressed woman, and asked about a beautiful handbag displayed on a shelf nearby. "That bag?" The associate replied with a dismissive tone, barely looking up from her phone. "It's quite expensive, very exclusive." The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Susan could feel her cheeks turning red. It wasn't just what the associate said. It was how she said it, implying that someone like Susan didn't belong in such an upscale environment. For a brief moment, Susan considered walking away without another word. But instead, she forced a smile and politely thanked the associate before leaving the store. Outside, she took a deep breath, trying to shake off the sting of rejection. Still, the encounter lingered in her mind long after she got home. That night. As she sat alone in her living room, Susan couldn't stop replaying the scene over and over again. She thought about all the times people had underestimated her because of how she looked or where she came from. And yet, here she was, a strong, resilient woman who had overcome countless challenges in her life. Why should she let someone else's judgment define her worth? Slowly, an idea began to form in her mind. What if this moment of rejection could become something more, something bigger than herself? Susan realized she wasn't angry anymore. She was determined. Determined to prove not only to herself but also to the world that true value doesn't come from labels or price tags. It comes from within. By the time she went to bed that night, Susan knew exactly what she needed to do next. This wouldn't just be about buying a handbag. It would be about creating something that celebrated real women, women like her. The next morning, Susan woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She didn't waste any time. She grabbed a notebook and started jotting down ideas. Her mind was racing with thoughts about how she could turn her pain into something positive. What if she created her own line of bags and clothing? Something that wasn't just stylish but also affordable and made for real women. Women who worked hard, cared deeply, and deserved to feel confident no matter their background or bank account. Her daughter noticed the change in her mom right away. Over breakfast, she asked, "Mom, you seem different today. What's going on?" Susan hesitated for a moment, unsure if her idea sounded too ambitious. But then she decided to share it anyway. She told her daughter everything: the rejection at the store, the sleepless night, and now this big dream of starting her own brand. Her daughter listened quietly, her eyes widening as the story unfolded. When Susan finished talking, her daughter smiled and said, "That's amazing, Mom. You should totally do it. People need someone like you out there, someone who understands what it's like to be overlooked." Those words gave Susan the push she needed. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this crazy idea could actually work. But Susan knew it wouldn't be easy. She had zero experience in fashion design or running a business. Everything would have to be learned from scratch. So she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. She spent hours online, researching fabrics, learning about sewing techniques, and studying successful brands. She visited local fabric stores, touching every material, asking questions, and taking notes. At first, the salespeople at these stores looked at her skeptically, a middle-aged woman asking technical questions about textiles, but soon they warmed up to her enthusiasm. Every evening after dinner, Susan turned her dining table into a makeshift workspace. Fabric swatches, sketches, and sticky notes covered every inch of the surface. Some nights she stayed up until 2 a.m., carefully stitching together prototypes by hand. Her fingers were often sore, and there were more than a few pricks from the needle, but she didn't care. This project had become her mission, her way of proving to herself and to the world that she was capable of so much more than anyone gave her credit for. Her daughter joined in whenever she could, helping with research, offering feedback on designs, and even setting up social media accounts to document the process. Together, they came up with a name for the brand, Authentic Threads. It was simple yet powerful, reflecting Susan's belief that true style comes from being comfortable in your own skin. Every piece she designed was meant to celebrate individuality, practicality, and confidence. Word began to spread around their neighborhood. Friends and neighbors noticed the transformation in Susan. Gone was the quiet, reserved woman they'd always known. In her place was someone full of energy and determination. One day, a close friend stopped by and saw the growing collection of handmade bags and scarves laid out on the couch. "Wow, these are incredible," the friend exclaimed. "You should sell them." At first, Susan laughed off the suggestion. Selling her creations seemed like a distant dream. But the more people encouraged her, the more she started to think it might actually be possible. Maybe she really could build something meaningful, not just for herself, but for others too. After all, she wasn't the only one who had ever felt dismissed or undervalued. There were countless women out there who wanted clothes and accessories that made them feel seen and appreciated. With renewed motivation, Susan decided to take the next step. She reached out to some local craft fairs and community markets, hoping to test her products with real customers. To her surprise, almost everyone said yes. Within weeks, she had lined up her first event, a small outdoor market hosted by a local church. Nervous but excited, Susan spent days preparing. She ironed each item, arranged them neatly on display tables, and practiced her pitch over and over again in front of the mirror. On the day of the market, Susan arrived early, setting up her booth under a bright blue canopy. As shoppers began to trickle in, she greeted each one with a warm smile and an open heart. She didn't just try to sell her products, she shared her story. She talked about why she started making these pieces, how she wanted to create something accessible and empowering for everyday women. Many visitors lingered at her booth, not just because they liked the designs, but because they connected with her message. By the end of the day, Susan had sold nearly everything she brought. More importantly, she had collected email addresses and phone numbers from dozens of people eager to hear about her future plans. Driving home that evening, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This journey was still in its early stages, but already, she could see the impact it was having, not just on her life, but on the lives of others too. Susan knew there would be challenges ahead. Scaling her operation, finding reliable suppliers, and competing in a crowded market wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, she felt unstoppable. Rejection had once made her feel small, but now it fueled her fire. She was determined to show the world that authenticity and resilience could shine brighter than any luxury label ever could. The success of the local market gave Susan a much-needed confidence boost, but she knew it was just the beginning. Selling handmade items at craft fairs and community events wasn't going to be enough to grow her dream into something bigger. She needed resources, money, materials, and manpower that were far beyond what she could manage on her own. For someone who had always lived paycheck to paycheck, the idea of raising funds felt overwhelming. But Susan had learned one important lesson over the past few weeks. When you're determined, even the impossible starts to feel possible. Her daughter sat down with her one evening to brainstorm ideas. "What if we tried crowdfunding?" her daughter suggested. "There are platforms where people can donate to support projects they believe in. Your story is inspiring. It'll resonate with so many people." At first, Susan hesitated. Putting herself out there like that felt scary. What if nobody cared? What if she failed publicly? But then she reminded herself why she started this journey in the first place. If she didn't take risks, nothing would ever change. Together, they spent days working on a campaign video. They filmed clips of Susan sewing late at night, arranging her creations on display tables, and talking passionately about her vision for authentic threads. In the final cut, Susan spoke directly to the camera, sharing her experience of being rejected at the luxury store and how it inspired her to create something better. Her voice trembled slightly as she recounted the painful memory, but her eyes sparkled with determination. By the end of the video, viewers couldn't help but root for her. When the crowdfunding page went live, Susan held her breath. Would anyone care about her little project? The first few hours ticked by slowly, with only a handful of donations trickling in from friends and family. Then something incredible happened. A popular blogger stumbled across the campaign and shared it on social media. Within minutes, shares and comments flooded in. Women from all over the country began chiming in, saying things like, "This is exactly what we need," and "I've been waiting for a brand like this my whole life." By the end of the first week, the campaign had blown past its initial funding goal. Messages poured in from strangers, thanking Susan for having the courage to follow her dream. Some shared their own stories of rejection or self-doubt, saying her words had given them hope. Others pledged not just money but their support, offering connections to fabric suppliers, marketing advice, and even volunteering to help spread the word. It was more than Susan had ever imagined, and it reinforced her belief that she was on to something special. With the funds secured, Susan faced her next big challenge: scaling production without losing the personal touch that made authentic threads unique. She knew she couldn't keep making everything by hand forever. It simply wasn't sustainable. So she reached out to local artisans and small manufacturers, looking for partners who aligned with her values. After several meetings and factory visits, she found a team of skilled workers who were excited to collaborate. They appreciated her commitment to quality and affordability, and they shared her passion for supporting women-led initiatives. As orders began rolling in, Susan quickly realized she needed help managing the growing workload. Her daughter pitched in whenever she could, handling emails, packing shipments, and updating the website. Neighbors and friends also volunteered their time, turning Susan's living room into a bustling hub of activity. Every morning, the group gathered around the dining table, sipping coffee and strategizing about the day ahead. It felt less like running a business and more like building a community, a tight-knit group of people united by a shared mission. But with growth came new challenges. Not everyone understood Susan's vision right away. Some customers complained that the prices were still too high, while others questioned why certain styles weren't available in larger quantities. Each critique stung, but Susan refused to let negativity derail her progress. Instead, she used the feedback to improve. She introduced payment plans for those on tighter budgets and worked tirelessly to streamline production so she could offer more variety without sacrificing quality. One day, as Susan was packing boxes for shipment, she received an email that brought tears to her eyes. It was from a woman who had recently purchased one of her bags. "I just wanted to thank you," the message read. "Your bag arrived yesterday and I wore it to work today. For the first time in ages, I felt proud of myself. Your story reminded me that I deserve to feel good no matter what anyone else says." Reading those words, Susan felt a surge of emotion. This wasn't just about selling products anymore. It was about making a difference in people's lives. Word of Susan's growing success continued to spread. Local newspapers picked up her story, highlighting her journey from rejection to empowerment. Soon, invitations to speak at community events and conferences began arriving in her inbox. At first, public speaking terrified her. Standing in front of a crowd wasn't something she'd ever done before, and the thought of stumbling over her words made her nervous. But once she stepped onto the stage and started talking about her experiences, the fear melted away. People connected with her honesty and vulnerability, hanging on every word as she shared lessons she'd learned along the way. Through it all, Susan stayed grounded. Despite the growing recognition, she never lost sight of why she started Authentic Threads. Every piece she created carried a tag with a handwritten note, "Made with love, for you." It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to her customers. They weren't just buying a bag or a scarf. They were investing in a movement that celebrated authenticity and resilience. As the months passed, Susan's confidence grew alongside her business. What had started as a response to rejection had blossomed into something far greater than she ever dreamed possible. And yet, deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. There was still so much work to do, so many women to reach, and so many barriers to break. But for now, Susan allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had proven, to herself and to the world, that rejection doesn't define you. Instead, it can become the catalyst for something extraordinary. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but Susan was ready. With her daughter by her side, her community cheering her on, and a heart full of purpose, she prepared to take the next step. Little did she know, the best was yet to come. As Susan's story gained traction, the world began to take notice. What started as a small act of defiance against rejection had blossomed into something much bigger, a movement that resonated with people from all walks of life. Her journey wasn't just inspiring women in her neighborhood anymore. It was reaching corners of the country she'd never imagined. Journalists and bloggers were eager to tell her story, and soon enough, Authentic Threads became more than a brand. It became a symbol of hope. One afternoon, while sorting through orders in her makeshift workspace, Susan received an email that made her heart skip a beat. It was from a major fashion magazine asking if she'd be willing to be featured in their upcoming issue. The subject line read, "Celebrating women who are changing the game." Susan stared at the screen for a full minute, unable to believe what she was reading. Her hands trembled as she clicked open the email and read the details. They wanted to include her alongside other trailblazing entrepreneurs who were redefining the industry. At first, Susan thought it must be some kind of mistake. How could someone like her, someone who had once been dismissed by a luxury store, end up being recognized by one of the most prestigious publications in the fashion world? But when she called the number listed in the email to confirm, the editor on the other end assured her it was real. "We've been following your journey," the editor said warmly. "Your message is exactly what our readers need to hear right now." The photo shoot was scheduled for 2 weeks later, and Susan immediately felt overwhelmed. She had no idea how to pose for cameras or style herself for such a high-profile event. Thankfully, her daughter stepped in, helping her pick out an outfit. One of her own designs, of course, and practicing poses in front of the mirror. On the day of the shoot, Susan arrived at the studio feeling nervous but determined. The photographer greeted her with a warm smile and encouraged her to relax. "Just be yourself," he said. "That's why they chose you." For the cover photo, Susan wore a sleek navy blazer paired with tailored trousers, both pieces from her latest collection. The look was polished yet approachable, reflecting everything Authentic Threads stood for. As the camera flashed, Susan focused on the reason she was there: to show the world that true beauty comes from within and that everyone deserves to feel valued. By the end of the session, even the makeup artist complimented her poise, saying, "You carry yourself like someone who knows her worth." When the magazine hit stands a month later, Susan couldn't believe her eyes. There she was, smiling confidently on the glossy pages, surrounded by stories of innovation and empowerment. The article highlighted not only her business success but also the deeper meaning behind Authentic Threads. Readers learned about the rejection that sparked her journey, the late nights spent sewing prototypes, and the unwavering support of her family and community. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from women across the globe, thanking Susan for reminding them that they too could rise above adversity. But fame brought its own set of challenges. Luxury department stores that had once ignored her suddenly reached out, eager to stock Authentic Threads in their boutiques. At first, the offers seemed flattering. These were the same kinds of places where Susan had once felt invisible, and now they wanted her creations on their shelves. However, Susan approached these opportunities with caution. She knew how easy it would be to lose sight of her mission in pursuit of profit. Before agreeing to any partnership, she asked tough questions. Did the store align with her values? Would they treat her customers with respect? Most importantly, would this move stay true to the spirit of authentic threads? In the end, Susan turned down several lucrative deals because the companies involved didn't share her commitment to inclusivity and affordability. Some friends questioned her decision, arguing that she was passing up a chance to make millions. But Susan didn't care about getting rich. For her, this journey had always been about creating something meaningful, not chasing empty accolades. Those who truly understood her vision respected her choices, and her loyal customer base grew even stronger because of it. Meanwhile, Susan continued to expand her reach in ways that stayed true to her roots. She launched workshops aimed at empowering women to pursue their dreams no matter how daunting they seemed. Held in community centers and libraries, these sessions covered everything from building confidence to navigating setbacks. Susan often shared her own struggles, emphasizing that failure isn't the end, it's just part of the process. Attendees left each workshop feeling inspired and equipped to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead. Her efforts didn't stop there. Susan also started a mentorship program connecting aspiring entrepreneurs with experienced professionals in various industries. Through partnerships with local organizations, she provided resources like free training sessions, networking events, and micro-grants to help women turn their ideas into reality. Many participants credited Susan with giving them the push they needed to take the leap. One woman wrote to thank her after launching her own catering business, saying, "If you hadn't shown me that I'm capable of more than I think, I'd still be stuck dreaming instead of doing." Despite her growing influence, Susan remained humble. She refused to let success change who she was at her core. Every morning, she woke up early to answer emails, pack orders, and sketch new designs. She still attended local markets, chatting with customers face-to-face and hearing their stories. And whenever someone thanked her for making a difference in their life, she responded with a simple, heartfelt, "Thank you for believing in me." By this point, Susan's impact extended far beyond fashion. She had become a beacon of resilience, proving that rejection doesn't have to break you, it can build you. Her journey served as a reminder that everyone has the power to redefine their narrative, no matter where they start. For Susan, the road ahead was still long, filled with challenges and uncertainties, but she faced it with the same determination that had carried her this far. After all, she had already shown the world that when you embrace authenticity and refuse to give up, anything is possible. As Susan's influence continued to grow, she found herself stepping into roles she never imagined. Speaking engagements became a regular part of her schedule, and each one brought its own set of nerves and triumphs. At first, standing in front of large crowds made her palms sweat and her voice waver. But over time, she discovered something remarkable. The more vulnerable she was, the more people connected with her. Her honesty about her struggles, being rejected at that luxury store, doubting herself during late-night sewing sessions, and facing criticism along the way, resonated deeply with audiences. One particular event stood out in her mind. It was a conference for women entrepreneurs held in a bustling convention center. Hundreds of attendees packed the auditorium, their eyes fixed on Susan as she walked onto the stage. The room fell silent except for the soft hum of anticipation. Clutching the microphone, Susan took a deep breath and began sharing her story. Not just the successes, but also the moments of doubt and fear. She talked about how rejection had initially crushed her spirit, but ultimately pushed her to create something meaningful. "I learned that rejection isn't the end," she said, her voice steady now. "It's an invitation to dig deeper, to prove yourself not to others but to you. If I can go from feeling invisible to building a brand that celebrates real women, then trust me, so can you." By the time she finished speaking, the audience erupted into applause. Women lined up afterward to thank her, some wiping away tears, others asking for advice or simply wanting to shake her hand. That day, Susan realized her words had power. They could inspire action, spark hope, and remind people of their own strength. But Susan didn't stop at conferences and workshops. She wanted to reach even more people, especially those who might not have access to such events. So, she started a podcast called Threads of Authenticity. Each episode featured candid conversations with everyday women who had overcome challenges and turned their lives around. Some guests were small business owners like her, others were teachers, nurses, artists, or stay-at-home moms. What united them all was their resilience and determination to make a difference despite obstacles. The podcast quickly gained traction, thanks in part to Susan's natural ability to connect with people. She asked thoughtful questions, listened intently, and shared bits of her own journey when appropriate. Listeners loved hearing stories they could relate to, stories that reminded them they weren't alone. One listener wrote in saying, "Your podcast feels like sitting down with a friend who gets it. Thank you for reminding me that my struggles matter and that I'm stronger than I think." While Susan poured her energy into inspiring others, Authentic Threads kept growing too. Orders flooded in faster than ever before, and Susan knew she needed to expand her team. Hiring employees wasn't something she took lightly. It felt like bringing new family members into the fold. She prioritized hiring women from underserved communities, offering fair wages and flexible hours. Many of these women had faced barriers in traditional workplaces, whether due to lack of experience, childcare responsibilities, or discrimination. Susan believed everyone deserved a chance to succeed, and she worked hard to create an environment where they felt valued and supported. 2. Keep up with demand. Susan partnered with ethical manufacturers committed to sustainable practices. She visited factories personally, ensuring workers were treated fairly and operations aligned with her values. Customers appreciated knowing their purchases contributed to positive change, which only strengthened their loyalty to the brand. Social media buzzed with photos of women proudly wearing Authentic Threads pieces, often tagging Susan and sharing how the clothing made them feel empowered. Despite her success, Susan remained grounded. She still lived in the same modest house, drove her reliable old car, and spent weekends volunteering at local shelters. Fame hadn't changed her priorities. It had only deepened her commitment to giving back. Whenever someone complimented her achievements, she redirected the praise to her community. "This isn't just my story," she'd say. "It belongs to everyone who believed in me, supported me, and reminded me that I'm capable of more than I thought." Yet not everything went smoothly. As Authentic Threads expanded, Susan faced criticism from unexpected places. A few competitors accused her of capitalizing on her underdog narrative, while some online trolls dismissed her efforts as performative. Reading these comments stung, but Susan refused to let negativity consume her. Instead, she leaned on her support system, her daughter, her team, and the countless women who cheered her on daily. They reminded her why she started this journey in the first place: to uplift others, not to seek validation from critics. One evening, after a particularly tough day, Susan sat down with her daughter to reflect. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough," she admitted. "There's always more work to do, more people to reach. How will I know when it's enough?" Her daughter smiled gently. "You'll never finish because there's always room to grow. But look at what you've already done. You've touched so many lives, including mine. Isn't that enough for today?" Her daughter's words stayed with Susan long after their conversation ended. They reminded her to celebrate progress, no matter how small, and to focus on the impact rather than perfection. The next morning, she woke up with renewed clarity. This journey wasn't about reaching some arbitrary finish line. It was about showing up every day, staying true to her values, and continuing to make a difference in whatever way she could. As months turned into years, Susan's legacy grew beyond anything she could have dreamed. Authentic Threads employed hundreds of women worldwide, providing stable jobs and opportunities for growth. Her workshops and mentorship programs reached thousands more, equipping them with tools to chase their dreams. And through her podcast, she amplified voices that might otherwise have gone unheard. People began referring to her as a champion of authenticity, though Susan preferred to think of herself simply as someone trying to leave the world better than she found it. Looking back, Susan marveled at how far she'd come since that fateful day at the luxury store. Rejection had once left her feeling invisible, but it ultimately led her to discover her purpose. Now, instead of shrinking under judgment, she stood tall, using her platform to lift others up. Every stitch and every piece of clothing carried a message. You are enough. Your story matters. Keep going. And yet Susan knew the journey was far from over. There were still women out there waiting to be seen, waiting to be told they mattered. For Susan, that meant there was still work to do, and she couldn't wait to get started. Years had passed since Susan first stepped into that luxury store, only to walk out feeling dismissed and invisible. Now, standing in front of a packed auditorium at a prestigious award ceremony, she couldn't help but reflect on how drastically her life had changed. The room was filled with the buzz of anticipation as industry leaders, entrepreneurs, and activists gathered to celebrate achievements in fashion and social impact. Tonight, Susan wasn't just an attendee. She was one of the honorees. When her name was called for the Visionary Leader Award, Susan took a deep breath before stepping onto the stage. The spotlight felt warm against her skin, and the applause echoed through the grand hall like waves crashing on a shore. She scanned the crowd, her eyes landing briefly on her daughter, who sat beaming in the front row. Clutching the microphone, Susan began her acceptance speech, not with polished words or rehearsed lines, but with raw honesty. I never imagined I'd be here tonight, she said, her voice steady yet soft. A few years ago, I walked into a store hoping to buy something nice for myself. Instead of being welcomed, I was made to feel like I didn't belong. That moment hurt, but it also taught me something important. No one gets to decide your worth, except you. Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with the audience. People leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every syllable. Susan went on to talk about the journey that followed, the late nights spent sewing, the crowdfunding campaign fueled by strangers' kindness, and the countless women who supported her vision along the way. She spoke about how rejection had pushed her to create something bigger than herself, a brand that celebrated real women, flaws and all. This isn't just my story, she continued. It's the story of every person who has ever been told they aren't good enough. You are enough, and if you keep going even when it feels impossible, you can turn pain into purpose. By the time she finished speaking, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Women nodded in agreement, some whispering to their neighbors. She's speaking directly to me. Men clapped loudly, respecting the grit and determination it took to build something so meaningful. As Susan stepped off the stage, she was met with hugs, handshakes, and heartfelt congratulations. For a woman who once doubted her place in the world, this moment felt surreal. But it was only the beginning. The recognition brought new opportunities, ones Susan hadn't anticipated. Major media outlets reached out asking to feature her story. A popular morning show invited her to appear as a guest, not just to talk about authentic threads, but to share her message of resilience and empowerment. At first, Susan hesitated. Appearing on national television seemed intimidating, especially given her humble beginnings. But then she remembered why she started this journey, to inspire others. If sharing her story could encourage even one person to believe in themselves, it would be worth it. Her appearance on the show was nothing short of transformative. Dressed in one of her own designs, a bold red blazer paired with tailored black pants, Susan exuded confidence. The host introduced her as a trailblazer, redefining what it means to lead with authenticity, and the interview quickly turned into a celebration of Susan's accomplishments. Viewers flooded social media during the live broadcast, praising her humility and strength. One viewer tweeted, "I needed to hear this today. Thank you for reminding me that my struggles don't define me." But Susan knew fame came with responsibility. With more visibility came greater scrutiny, and she vowed to stay true to her values. Every decision she made, from expanding her product line to partnering with organizations promoting women's rights, was guided by her mission to uplift others. She refused to compromise on quality, affordability, or inclusivity, even when it meant turning down lucrative deals from companies whose ethics didn't align with hers. One day, while reviewing potential collaborations, Susan received an email that caught her attention. It was from a global nonprofit focused on empowering women in developing countries. They wanted to team up with Authentic Threads to provide training programs in textile production, giving women in underserved communities the skills they needed to support themselves and their families. Susan read the proposal twice, her heart swelling with excitement. This was exactly the kind of partnership she dreamed of, a chance to make a tangible difference on a global scale. After months of planning, the collaboration launched successfully. Women from rural villages learned how to sew, design, and market their creations under Susan's guidance. Some of their handmade items were featured in limited edition collections sold through Authentic Threads, with proceeds reinvested into the program. Customers loved knowing their purchases helped women halfway across the world achieve financial independence. Letters poured in from participants, thanking Susan for believing in them and giving them hope for a brighter future. Despite her growing influence, Susan remained committed to staying grounded. She continued visiting local markets, chatting with customers, and listening to their feedback. These interactions reminded her why she started Authentic Threads in the first place, to create clothing that made people feel seen and valued. One chilly Saturday morning, while setting up her booth at a community fair, a young girl approached Susan shyly. She held up a scarf from the latest collection and asked, "Did you really make this?" Susan smiled warmly and knelt down to meet the girl's gaze. "Yes, I did. Do you like it?" The girl nodded enthusiastically. "It's my favorite color," she said, clutching the scarf tightly. Then, after a pause, she added, "My mom says you're a hero because you help women like her." Susan blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the simplicity of the compliment. To this little girl, she wasn't just a business owner or an award-winning entrepreneur. She was someone who mattered. Moments like these kept Susan motivated. No matter how busy life got, she made time for the things that truly mattered: connecting with people, mentoring aspiring entrepreneurs, and continuing to push boundaries in her work. Her podcast, Threads of Authenticity, evolved into a platform where listeners shared their own stories of triumph over adversity. Each episode ended with a call to action. What challenge will you face today? How will you rise above it? As Susan looked ahead, she knew challenges would still arise. Running a business wasn't easy, and balancing growth with integrity required constant vigilance. But she faced each obstacle with the same determination that had carried her this far. Rejection had once tried to silence her, but instead, it had ignited a fire within her, a fire that burned brighter with every step forward. Now Susan stood at the intersection of success and purpose, grateful for the journey that had brought her here. She had proven to herself and to the world that true strength lies not in avoiding failure but in rising above it. Her story was proof that even the smallest act of defiance could spark a movement, touching millions of lives along the way. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: Susan's legacy of authenticity and resilience would continue to inspire generations to come. Susan's journey had taken her to places she never dreamed of, but what truly mattered to her wasn't the awards, the media attention, or even the success of Authentic Threads. It was the lives she touched along the way, the countless women who found courage because of her story, the families lifted out of poverty through her partnerships, and the communities empowered by her vision. As she looked back on everything she'd built, Susan realized that her greatest achievement wasn't the business itself. It was the ripple effect it created, spreading hope and resilience far beyond her own life. One crisp autumn morning, Susan decided to visit a small town where one of her nonprofit collaborations was underway. She hadn't planned to go. It was supposed to be just another update meeting, but something inside her urged her to see the program in action. When she arrived at the community center, she was greeted by rows of sewing machines humming softly. Their operators focused intently on their work. Women of all ages sat side by side, stitching vibrant fabrics into beautiful garments. Some glanced up curiously as Susan entered, while others didn't notice her at all, too absorbed in their craft. A local coordinator introduced Susan to the group, explaining that she was the founder of Authentic Threads. The room erupted into applause, and several women rushed over to thank her. One older woman held Susan's hands tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Before this program, I didn't know how I would feed my children," she said, her voice trembling. "Now, I can provide for them and teach them that they can do anything if they try." Susan listened quietly, her throat tight with emotion. This was why she did what she did, not for recognition, but for moments like these. Later that day, Susan joined the women for lunch, sitting cross-legged on the floor as they shared stories of struggle and triumph. They spoke about the challenges they faced: poverty, discrimination, lack of education, and how learning new skills had given them a sense of purpose. One young woman shyly showed Susan a dress she had designed herself, her eyes lighting up with pride. "I want to start my own shop someday," she said, glancing nervously at Susan. "Do you think I can?" Susan smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on the young woman's shoulder. "Of course you can," she replied firmly. "If I can, do it, so can you. Just take it one step at a time and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The young woman nodded, her expression shifting from doubt to determination. For Susan, it was a reminder of how powerful encouragement could be. A few simple words could plant a seed of belief that might grow into something extraordinary. Back home, Susan carried those conversations with her, letting them fuel her passion for the work ahead. She knew there were still so many women out there waiting to be seen, waiting to be told they mattered. And while she couldn't reach everyone personally, she believed deeply in the power of storytelling to inspire change. So, she poured her energy into sharing her experiences through interviews, podcasts, and social media posts, hoping her words would find their way to those who needed them most. Her efforts paid off in unexpected ways. A high school teacher reached out to say that she had shared Susan's story with her students during a lesson on perseverance. "One of my girls came up to me afterward and said, 'If she can do it, maybe I can too,'" the teacher wrote. "That moment reminded me why teaching is so important. Thank you for being a role model." Another message came from a man whose wife had battled self-doubt for years. After hearing Susan speak at a conference, his wife began pursuing a dream she'd long abandoned: opening a bakery. "Your words gave her permission to believe in herself again," he wrote. "We're forever grateful." These messages reinforced Susan's belief that every person has the potential to make a difference, no matter how ordinary they might feel. She often thought about the luxury store incident that had set her on this path. What if she had walked away that day and let rejection define her? Would she have missed out on this incredible journey of growth, connection, and impact? The thought sent shivers down her spine. Painful as it had been, that moment of dismissal had become the catalyst for everything good in her life. As time went on, Susan embraced her role not just as a business owner but as a storyteller, advocate, and mentor. She launched a scholarship fund to support women entrepreneurs, providing financial assistance and mentorship to help them bring their ideas to life. Recipients of the scholarship became part of a growing network of changemakers, each contributing to a world where authenticity and inclusivity took center stage. Her daughter, now grown and pursuing her own dreams, often joked that Susan should write a book. "People need to hear your story," she said one evening over dinner. "Not just the highlights, but the messy parts too. The doubts, the failures, the late nights when you weren't sure you could keep going." Susan laughed, brushing off the suggestion. But deep down, she knew her daughter was right. Her journey wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt invisible, underestimated, or unworthy. Years later, when Susan finally decided to put pen to paper, the book became more than a memoir. It was a guide, a love letter to resilience, and a call to action for anyone daring to dream bigger than society expected of them. Readers devoured it, finding solace in Susan's vulnerability and inspiration in her determination. Book clubs across the country adopted it as required reading, sparking discussions about identity, purpose, and the importance of staying true to oneself. Through it all, Susan remained humble. Fame and accolades were nice, but they weren't what kept her going. What drove her was the knowledge that somewhere, someone was rising above their circumstances because of her example. Whether it was a young girl designing her first dress, a struggling mother starting a catering business, or a retired teacher volunteering at a shelter, Susan's legacy lived on in the actions of others. On quiet evenings, Susan liked to sit by the window, sipping tea and reflecting on her journey. She thought about the luxury store, the crowdfunding campaign, the women she'd met along the way, and the countless lives touched by authentic threads. Each memory was a thread in the tapestry of her life, woven together to create something meaningful and enduring. Rejection had once made her feel small, but it had ultimately led her to discover her strength. Pain had taught her compassion, failure had taught her resilience, and success had taught her humility. Now, as she gazed out at the horizon, Susan felt a profound sense of peace. Her story wasn't finished. It would continue to evolve, touching lives in ways she might never fully understand. But for now, she was content knowing that she had done her part to leave the world better than she found it. And so, Susan's journey served as a timeless reminder. Setbacks are not the end of the road, they are the beginning of something greater. With courage, authenticity, and an unshakable belief in oneself, anyone can turn pain into purpose and rejection into triumph. That was Susan's gift to the world, and it would inspire millions for generations to come.